Coach Tori, and this is Raising Runners. In today's episode, I get to interview Melissa Buddie, who is an LCSW, that's a licensed clinical social worker, and a marathoner and a mom. We have such great conversation today talking about more of the mental health side of coaching and parenting kids, especially athletes. We talk about the races that she's run. She's done some really awesome marathons and has learned a lot about herself as a runner. In doing so, we talk about the mental side of racing. She explains some of the science behind learning and how we feel about ourselves. She gives some really great tips for motivating kids to stay in a sport or just motivating them through sports. She also offers me some great advice as a coach. I can't wait to try out some of these things while I'm coaching. And as you will hear in a second, we kind of just get right into talking. So it's kind of like a soft launch right into the interview. So hopefully you find some of this helpful. Information that way. So
yes,
that is the point.
All of that makes sense. I was actually deliberately trying to not vocalize while you were talking because I thought that's something I do as a therapist. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And I thought, oh my gosh, in a podcast, that's probably super annoying if the other person just keeps like interrupting with these unnecessary ahas. So I tried to not do that there, but that all made sense. I think people do have more time to listen than they do to sit and read things. It's just the way things have moved as far as like consumption of information in our society. So I think it's a great idea. And people probably will benefit from it. I don't want to say that specifically about my talk. That sounds very vain, but in general, I think that, yeah, there's a lot to learn about running, especially when you're trying to share that information and the joy of running with children and motivating their parents to push them. I don't know, push, but encourage. There we go. Encourage them to keep at it because it's a hard sport.
Well, and that was like my whole thing too. And like with the run club. So we try to we talk about it as empowerment, not so much like mental health, because I think sometimes that can just feel too heavy to people, yes. Which again, hopefully it won't be someday, but we try to have empowerment things mixed into every practice that we do, just because like that's so important to actually connect to yourself, but then connect to your sport and then feel like, I think all of us who work with kids in some capacity, like we really need to be boosting them up, but then teaching them to be able to boost themselves up too. So like that was the other part of it too, was like, I wanted to talk to you because I was like, great, having like a therapist perspective, it helps out a little bit with connecting some more of those heavier things, but like, what can we all do to not be damaging them when we're trying to push or encourage, right?
Absolutely. Because it can be a fine line. We want kids to pursue their interests, and there's so much benefit when they pursue their interests, and we don't want to pigeonhole them into certain activities, especially ones that they don't really care about, which I'm happy to talk more about. I don't know. Are we talking? Should I?
I know. It's like, we just kind of started talking. So I've been starting everybody with telling me about their running journey, kind of where you started running, how you got into it, kind of where you are now, and like anything that way, just because I feel like that helps people get to know you and feel kind of connected. And it's always fun to hear people's running stories because everyone's are so different.
Yes. Okay. So I was not a runner as a child. I was active. I played volleyball and lacrosse for a little bit, but I did not start running until I was in my early 20s. For me, I wanted to start to be more active because once I went to college, I found that I was incredibly sedentary and it just didn't feel good. And I needed to get out and enjoy fresh air more and just move my body. And running was frankly it felt at the time like it'd be the cheapest thing to do, just buy a pair of shoes. In fact, I probably didn't even do that. I probably just found some in my closet. So I started running that way, and it didn't take long for me to feel the kind of competitive drive with it and want to see myself get faster and push myself to do better and better. And all along the way, of course, getting those other benefits of having that time to think through things and process life and blow off some steam and have stress relief. And so all of those things were coming along with it. I found myself running further. So I became more of a distance runner. I think I just do better at longer distances. I endure well. And so within probably 2 years of starting running, I moved to the marathon as maybe my favorite race distance. So since then, in the 10 years or so that I've been running, I think I've done 16 marathons. I'm sort of proud that I got to the point that I don't know off the top of my head, but it's around that. It's about 16 marathons. My husband started running too. And so that's been a wonderful thing for us. We ran together. We joined a run club when we used to live in Wisconsin. And that was a big way that we built community, which was amazing. When we moved, we're now in Indiana. When we moved to Indiana, we became part actually of a triathlon club because we did branch out a little bit and expand our sports. But that was one of our first ways to start to meet people here. And we draw on those connections for things both outside of the world of sport and within all the time. And then him and I have been able to run together. I had my first kiddo. I'm now pregnant with my second, but I had my first kiddo in July of 2020. And us running together as a family has become our new hobby that we have just gotten so much out of. Pushing the jogging stroller, which is really hard, but very fun to be able to go out, the three of us, and do those miles together. And that's something I didn't expect when I started running, that it would be some type of family activity for us ever, in the future, that would be something that I would do as a runner. But that has been the newest aspect of my running world, and probably the most fulfilling, the most really like deeply gratifying in the 10 years that I've been running.
I love that. So have you been shopping for your double running stroller then, or do you already have a double?
We don't. That is a very good question. The single was like a hit to the pocketbook. So it's like the double's even more. So a little intimidating.
Yeah.
And I'm a small person. I'm rather petite. And so I'm thinking like, can I realistically push a double one? At the same time, like, it's just been so wonderful to be able to go on those runs that it feels like we're going to do it. So we're dragging our feet a little bit to be like, okay, are we sure? Or are we sure we're going to want to take both kids? But we want to. So maybe a good sale will come around. The baby's due in October. It's very cold here in the winter. So we probably won't. Plus baby strollers, you don't put a baby in the day they're born, not into a jogging stroller. So we'd wait till spring anyway. So maybe between now and March or April, there will be a good sale. Or maybe we find one on the secondhand market too, because people are getting rid of those things all the time.
Yeah. I was going to say, I always see them on Facebook Marketplace. And I actually don't usually see a double, but I also am never looking for a double. But you guys could do two singles, and that would be kind of cute for you both to be pushing the stroller. I like that idea.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. We talked about that. That's not a bad idea at all. That might be the most realistic one. That way, yeah, I'm not like trying to push. I don't even know how much it would weigh with two kids in the stroller up those hills. That would be a lot.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine. Okay, so back to your at least 16 marathons. Do you have a favorite, and do you have a least favorite? And are either of those one that you learned the most?
Well, that's a great question.
A lot of a question, but
yes. Okay. So I did just run Boston, and I was 12 weeks pregnant, and I knew I was going to be slow. So I put a baby on board thing on my back, just sort of like, like, I promise I really qualified. I'm just slow. But that made it so fun. And so I previously would not have said Boston because my past experiences, I've just had really bad days. But that was the most fun I've ever had in a race. I was running about a minute per mile slower than I would have not pregnant, but interacting with everybody, like the crowds and the runners, and just trying to enjoy the day and having no time goals, and taking all the oranges from the kiddos and the pretzel rods and just celebrating for 26 miles was fantastic. So I know it's probably cliche to say Boston, but it was a really amazing day. And that one will stick with me for a very long time. My least favorite marathon, I don't mean to disparage the race itself, but I did a race in Kenosha, Wisconsin called the Wisconsin Marathon. And I don't discourage people from signing up for it, but I just had a bad day. and it's a small race. And so at the end of the race, when you're really hurting and there's nobody else around, and it was like the death march, I wasn't hitting my time goals. And we had traveled up there kind of on a lark because I thought I was in shape to run really well. So it was just disappointing all around. That was probably my least favorite, not a lot of spectators, not a lot of participants, and just not a good day for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say the crowd and just like the energy can really, like, even if you're coming in with different energy, sometimes the crowd and everything can change that, but also if like that's not there too. Yeah, I totally get that.
Yes, that was a struggle. It was really hard to get to the finish line. It's probably the closest I ever came to just being like, what's the point, and walking off the course. But I guess my pride made me finish anyway, but I was very disappointed with that outcome.
Yeah. Now, do you have one that you, whether it was good or bad, that you think you learned the most, either like about yourself as a runner or a competitor, or just like, I really know how to fuel for marathons now, or if it doesn't have to be a marathon, if you ran other distances too?
That is a great question. I would say I learned the most about myself. It was maybe I have recency bias, but I ran the Indianapolis Marathon in the fall, just this past fall. And that one I had signed up for because I had just run another marathon. That was my first marathon postpartum, and I had taken it easy, and I ended up negative splitting the other race by 12 minutes. And I thought, well, geez, like I probably could have done better. So I signed up for another race to see what would happen. And I had no idea. I didn't really have a lot of recovery time, and I was still learning about kind of my postpartum body and what it was capable of. And so I went into that just curious to see what would happen, but also wanting to push, saying, I don't want another 12-minute negative split. I want to see if I kind of walk that red line, what can I achieve? And it was probably around mile 20 or so that, of course, it started hurting a little bit, but I had fueled pretty well and I had paced pretty well. And so at mile 20, I somehow made this shift, and I don't think I've ever done it in a marathon before, but where I suddenly was like, this race is mine. And of course I wasn't winning, but like this race is mine. And this is my time. Like everyone else is hurting at mile 20 and I am thriving at mile 20, and I am going to just pick them off one by one. And I'm not that competitive. Like everyone else was a wonderful, fabulous human, but sort of that mindset of I'm just going to pass at person after person here. And I own this part of the course. And I've never felt that way in a race before. And it just felt amazing. I still did negative split that one too, but only by like 4 minutes. So yeah, I felt better about that, but I've never felt so good at the end of a race, and learning that I have that in me, because before it was always hang on at mile 20. And that mental part for me was really hard to shift the mindset from survival to how do I start to take advantage of this time and own it and make this the time I am my best, not the time that I'm just trying to hope my splits don't fall so far off that I'm like practically walking. And that was really empowering for me. And it shifted how I feel I could do in future races too, because I feel like I've unlocked something here. I'm having a second kid. I don't know what that's going to look like postpartum, but knowing that I have this kind of new tool that intangible, that no matter what shape my body's in, if I can have this mental game more fine-tuned, that's going to help me do the best that I can possibly do that day.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question actually, is do you have something that you either, I know like some people like music, some people do podcasts, some people want no sound, some people do mantras in their heads. Like, do you have something? I mean, it sounds like you kind of found something that works for you, especially at the end of a race, but like, what do you normally, where are you thinking, what are you doing normally during a race with your mindset?
So I try to replicate training as much as possible for the first chunk, because I do want to relax. I don't want to overthink it. When we're dealing with the marathon, that's several hours. So if I can get through the first, we'll say 20 miles or so, as non-dramatically as possible. So I do try to replicate training where I listen to podcasts most of the time, especially running podcasts. And the couple weeks before the race, I will specifically look for episodes that I think are really good and then not listen to them so that when the race comes, I'm excited to hear them. Once I get to the last couple miles, I notice I tune out a lot more of the podcast. I don't actually turn it off, but I'm not really listening anymore. And at that point, I do use mantras to start getting me through. And it's things like sort of what I was alluding to before, but like this race is your race. This is the part that you own. This is where you dominate. No one can slow you down here. And I'll say things like that to myself. And I try to practice the last like trainings to start to familiarize myself with it as a race gets closer. But I also have done visualization where I literally lie in bed and I picture those last several miles of the race, which is easier if you've done the race before. But even if you haven't, they're all somewhat similar at those last couple miles, and telling myself those mantras and seeing them working in my head and seeing myself getting faster and that I feel the pain, but it's not that bad and I can push through it. It's really amazing the power of visualization. And lots of professional athletes they've known this for years. They've been doing this for a long time. When you can visualize it, your brain doesn't really know the difference between reality and visualization, which is really interesting to me, but it doesn't. It can't differentiate that well. And so it can be convinced that what you're visualizing is reality. And so then when you're in that situation, it knows what it's doing. It's been there before, and it's much more ready to just snap into whatever you've already coached it to do, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because when I used to race all the time, my mom had told me, visualize the race, see yourself crossing the finish line, see yourself where you want to be, see yourself where you want to kick, all those things. And, I kind of forgot about that when I wasn't racing, you don't really think about that stuff. And, I wasn't really talking to any running coaches or anything. So it's not on my mind at all. And I signed up to do an open mile at our track, like my high school track, last Friday. And I'm like getting all nervous and I'm there and I'm like, what do I normally do to warm up? And I have my son with me and he's, all over the place. And then I was just like, I visualize. That's what I do. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing my A skips, B skips, all that stuff. But I'm like, I have to actually see myself crossing the finish line, doing all that stuff. And it's like, as soon as I got into that, I'm like, this is the routine I remember. This is how you prepare and how you get ready. So it's just funny because I'm like, that's always what you talk about is like, you have to visualize because, and I honestly at that moment forgot why I did it. I was like, I know I do this and I don't remember why. And then as you're saying it now, it's like, yeah, your brain can trick your body into, we've done this, we know how to do this. So I'm so glad you brought that up because I was just like, yeah, I do visualize things and I don't remember why we do that.
It's so easy to see it as kind of this fluffy something that, yes, a coach might tell you to do or a therapist might recommend. It's very easy to disregard it as insignificant or not beneficial. But if you talk to people who do it, they will tell you a different story. It can be so powerful.
Yeah, no, and I love the idea of it because it is such a simple thing you can do. You can do it so quickly. So now I'm like, I have to make a note that I have to talk to the kids at Run Club about that. Cause I'm like, I don't think we've ever really, we talk about a lot of other things about how to prepare for the race. But I'm like, I don't think I ever have them sit down and actually like, you need to make a movie in your head of you running the race. So no, I love that. And I think that perfectly shifts us into more of the therapy talk. I guess just like, more simple stuff to start, but do you have any tips, like do's, I guess, or don'ts for either parents or coaches or both? Because I know sometimes parents and coaches roles for young athletes can blend, but also, they have different roles for them, but things that we should or shouldn't be doing when we're trying to motivate our kids, whether it's to stay in a sport, to get into a sport, or just like encourage them because we know they're doing well.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You might remember there was a famous basketball coach, probably when we were both fairly young, Bobby Knight. He used to coach the IU Hoosiers, which is now where we live. And he was known for being mean. Basically, he was a mean coach. He would motivate by yelling and insulting his players. And he was a fairly successful coach. And so he stuck around for a long time. My biggest advice is that the Bobby Knight coaching style is not effective. It is he's an exception there, but when we're dealing with young children, we want to just push that aside and really embrace the opposite, that for kids, they're going to stick with activities that make them feel good about who they are, about their self-esteem, their worthiness with their friends within the team dynamic, that fulfill them, and boosting that up through giving them any type of positive feedback that we can. It's, we don't want to lie to our kids. If you say like, oh, you're so fast, and they know that they aren't, right? That's not going to, in fact, that's going to damage our relationship. That's not going to help, because then everything we say is going to feel inauthentic to them. But finding anything you can that can be a positive, whether it's about their perseverance, them always showing up, the way they treat their teammates, the smile on their face and their attitude, anything that makes them feel like this is where I belong. This makes me feel good about myself. This gives me some purpose, is really important. When we're dealing with kids, and I don't mean to kind of jump around here, but when we're dealing with a child's brain, our brain goes through a couple stages of intense growth, especially when we're young. And in those moments, we are taking everything in. That's why, teaching like really little kiddos foreign languages is so effective, is because their brain is primed to learn so much in those stages. And then we go through periods of time later on where we condense. Our brain is it's trying to be very efficient. And so it says like, I don't need all of these things anymore. So if I started talking to my toddler in Mandarin Chinese, he would learn a lot right now. But if I stopped and then never said another word of Chinese to him, by the time he's several years old, his brain will have pruned that away. We call it pruning, just like you would prune a tree. It would say, oh, I guess I don't need that. Even though actually Mandarin Chinese is a very useful skill, his brain would say, no one's talked to me in this language in years. Apparently it's not very important, and I'm just going to prune it away. When we're dealing with kids in sports and any activity, we want to expose them to as much as possible. And so letting them pursue their interests and find the things that they enjoy, especially because of how their brain is so ripe for that right now. What we don't want to do is overly pigeonhole them. And so if you're dealing with running, letting them explore running and whatever that might mean for them. And so, mixing up drills and offering different fun ways to pursue running in different distances and ways that are exciting and different as much as you can. When we pigeonhole them, the brain prunes, and we don't want to prune them at this age. It's going to happen naturally, but we don't want to get them to the point that it's happening and it's taking away the fun of running. It's pruning away the fun because their brain has decided that fun doesn't matter, because all we ever have to do are these specific drills and the fun is unimportant. We want to keep incorporating so much of these different aspects of it to help their brain continue to be engaged with it and thrive in their young age. So as much positivity as possible and as much creativity as possible, whether it is running or any other activity. So many fun games involve running. And so like mixing that into play and into your training could be a way that you keep it interesting and exciting for them.
Yeah, I feel like with running specifically, and I'm like, I never really played other sports, so I don't really have any great frame of reference. But yet, like you're saying, like there's so many games you can do with running. And I talk to a lot of the parents of like, yes, it looks like we're playing games all day sometimes, but like we are playing games all day sometimes. But even though they went 10 times, they had to go get the tennis ball and bring it back, and then they had to throw it and bring it back. But it's like, that's way more fun than doing 10 times 50-meter sprints, right? It's the same thing. And there's that short rest, but it's way more fun this way. So I love that, like reinforcing that, like, yes, like play-based learning, play-based practices can be just as effective. And it also helps their brains, right? And I'm sure this is like kids in general. I sometimes have groups of kids who, whether they didn't want to sign up or they thought it was going to be different or whatever it was, but they're here for 8 weeks and they're just not super motivated to run. Running's hard, everything is just not fun. Or sometimes it's just, we have kids who just, nothing's fun, right? What are ways to motivate them and try to get them engaged without, I guess, like making it like, sorry, you have to run, right? Like you're here, you have to run. Cause I find myself getting frustrated sometimes. And I'm like, I'll come home to my husband. I'm like, they just didn't want to run today. I don't understand why they're here if they don't want to run. And, it's like, why would they want to just run? You know what I mean? So what are things we can do to motivate them? I mean, I guess it's kind of an individualized thing, but if there's anything general.
Everybody has something that motivates them. But I'm thinking in general about kids and running. It might be helpful to find something that makes them feel good about themselves when they run, whether it's they feel good when they can be part of a team that like wins a relay, or even just like, does well and competes in the relay, or if they love the games aspect of it, or just finding something that makes them feel like they're important, though, that they matter. And maybe just asking them that question, right? So many times we try to like investigate kids and like be like these super sleuths and figure out what they're thinking. And that's really hard to do with any human, but especially children. And so maybe just asking them like, okay, I know that like lots of things about this you don't really like. I bet you could come up with one thing that you like about this, or one thing that like makes you feel good about this. They might even be like, when it's over, and like, okay, like, let's go with that. Then let's make this giant game of counting down the activities until it's over. And then when it's over, we're going to all like cheer super loud for you because you're super happy it's over. But finding something that helps them to feel like this makes me feel good. It could be a lot of work to try to figure that out for each individual kid.
Yeah.
But if you have some in particular that are really big challenges, asking them that question and seeing what comes from it, or just trying to notice through observation, like, is there a time where you see a smile on their face? And how do you then reflect that to them? Like, oh, it looks like you had a really good time when you were able to, play this one game, and trying to then incorporate that or that similar feeling for them as much as possible.
Yeah, no, and I think that's great advice. And as you were talking, I'm like starting to picture certain scenarios where, especially for like kids, where you notice the smile, right? Like they're like, oh, I hate coming to run club. And then I'm like, yeah, but when we play this one game, you always think, like, I always see you laughing, or you always ask to play this game. So no, I think that's great advice. And again, like, it is all individual, right? We have to find what's going to motivate different kids. And that can be hard on bigger teams, but like you're saying, find the ones that really seem to need that. No, that's awesome. So with kind of along those same lines, I guess I'm like kind of just morphing my questions as I go, I feel like, but kids, obviously, kids, adults, when we're learning a new skill, there is going to be an element of struggling or failure and those kinds of things. Are there specific, I guess, like cues or something to look for us as coaches or parents to notice that like this is just regular learning struggles, regular failure that they can pick themselves up from, or like we're pushing them too hard, or this is above their skill, or other things that we can look at, whether it's actual things they're doing or things they're saying, that can kind of tell us like we need to back off, or maybe they need more help with something else?
That is a great question. And just from the mental health perspective, because there's probably like a physical health kind of professional who might have an opinion of this too. But from a mental health perspective, what I would be looking for would be if the kid is discussing, like, let's say they go home and they're talking to mom about how hard running is. If they're talking about how hard running is and they're just sticking to that topic, running is really hard, like I feel tired. If they're sticking to that topic, that's a good sign that the struggle is kind of contained with running. What we want to avoid is, are we hitting on something bigger here? Do they struggle with running and they're now connecting that to other struggles in their life, and it's bringing up all of these other feelings that we don't intend? And the biggest clue for that would be if you go home and you're talking to mom and you're talking about how hard running is, and now you start talking about also how hard math is, and also how you felt that way when you weren't able to learn that new thing at school. Because what we're seeing there is an indication that this is a bigger belief about that the child holds about themselves, that they can't do something, they're not good enough, or that they're going to fail. This negative belief is a bigger, more salient belief that they hold about themselves. And running is just the latest thing that is proving that to themselves. When we see that, that's when we know we've got a bigger thing going on here. And we don't want to push too hard. The harder we push, the more we're going to reinforce that idea of I'm not good enough, I fail at things. We want to back off and instead try to find the strengths, try to find the things they're good at, take it easy with them, help them to find successes instead, because yes, we don't want to reinforce this belief they already hold about themselves that they're not good enough. So what you're looking for there is that they start linking running to other things in their life that are not positive things. Mood wise could also be a little bit of an indication. If they get home and they're kind of bummed and they're showing emotion, that would be normal. You should be able to redirect them fairly easily to something else that is a more positive emotion for them. If that doesn't happen and that negative mood is really sticking around and it's starting to then affect behavior in a big way at home, or you notice that like before practice, they're really acting out. I don't mean like dragging their feet a little, but there's a clear shift in who they are before practice is coming. That's another sign that this is bigger, that they're being pushed too far and they're now internalizing that feeling of, I don't want to do this. This makes me feel bad about myself. Again, in that case, we want to shift to the positive. Pushing kids to succeed when they can handle that push is an okay thing to do, but we want to make sure that it's not extending into a bigger belief about who they are, because if they don't find success in running, then all we've done is reinforced that this negative thing that isn't true about them, because they are not a failure. They don't not succeed at things. And we know that, but their brain doesn't know that. And we don't want to make running just another data point on this belief that they have that they are somehow less than. And if we push really hard and it just becomes failure after failure, that's what would happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that was, I feel like I can see the difference that you're explaining there. And it seems very clear, like how you can then proceed, like you're saying, shift to the positive. So back to the initial thing we were talking about with kids just saying like running's too hard, and it's because running can be hard. What would be, I don't want to say like an example of how to respond, but like I know everyone's kind of learning about validating feelings. I feel like in the past couple of years, they understand that like we need to validate the way someone feels because that makes them feel like, yes, they make sense as a person, right? So, you know, whether you're a coach or a parent and they're like running so hard, I think sometimes we often want to just be like, it's not too hard, you'll get there, you know. So I guess what would be like a better response to those kinds of things?
You are correct that validating feelings is very hot right now. And that was my first thought when you said this. So we don't want to dismiss. When we dismiss children's feelings, they feel that they're not heard, and we do lose some of our connectivity to them, and it makes it harder for us to get through to them in the future. So we do want to validate. One thing that you bring up the idea that kids will say running is hard. You've brought it up a few times. So I'm going to go ahead and run with the idea that kids say this, right? That this is not unheard of. So maybe anyone who's listening, start thinking about a time in your life where you did something that was really hard, right? That you had an initial struggle, that you weren't necessarily great at something right away, or you found it was hard to get into it, but you stuck with it. And having that story in your back pocket could serve you really well. So when a kid comes up to you and says, this is really hard, you want to start by validating and saying, yeah, running is really hard, isn't it? And it's not always fun, or you're trying to reflect whatever you think they're feeling. It's frustrating, or sometimes it really hurts, or whatever you know about their emotion, if you can bring that into it, to just validate it and treat it like it's truth, even though in the back of your head, you're like, there's benefits, that it's not always so bad, but don't go there yet. Just start with all the affirming, all of the, it is hard, it hurts, it's not always fun, it's really hot out. And then shifting to can I tell you a story about a time that I had to do something really hard? Asking permission is a little thing there, but I really recommend it. That again, you are honoring them as a person with feelings and you're giving them a little bit of control. They'll probably say yes, but asking permission is a really nice way to not just be preachy at them, but instead kind of walk side by side with them with this. And so assuming they say yes, sharing your story and being kid appropriate. So, filter where you need to, but giving them as much honesty as you can about what you were feeling. And if you can pull in any of the same emotions that you notice in them, if you can put that into your story, even better. But making sure that your story ends with why it was a good thing that you stuck with it. And, something that, again, I'm going to get back to how people feel about themselves. So how you felt about yourself because you stuck with it. Like, I was really proud of myself. I learned new things about myself. I learned that I can do hard things. Giving them that positive, you could feel this too. Right now you feel this, but if you stick with it, you will feel this too. Can help kids potentially to make that shift or become a little more open to sticking with it.
Yeah, I love that, because I think, like I just was saying, obviously I knew the whole validating part, but I sometimes struggle with, I don't want to try to make it about me. So then I kind of keep me completely out of it, but then you lose that connection, right? Like, you're not able to talk, like, hey, I feel you, I know where you're at. So no, I think that was great that was a perfect example of something that I definitely would like to try, because I'm like, usually I go with like, it is really hard, right? But it doesn't have to be. And then I'm like, and that's the end of my speech. So now what? Right. So no, I think that was great.
The less that you do talk about yourself, the more meaningful it is when you do. And so if you do that very intentionally, if the kids know, like, she doesn't normally tell us personal stuff, and there you are sharing it with the one kiddo who's really struggling, they're going to notice that. And so that's really powerful. And so using that intentionally could be a wonderful tool in your toolbox.
Yeah, I thank you so much for all. I'm like running out of time here, and I don't want to keep you for so long, but I feel like you just gave so many great tips for parents and coaches and people who are both, just with like being able to help our kids as young athletes, actually sticking through their sport and feeling good about it, so they're not burnt out, or anything else. Do you have anything else you want to say before I let you go?
If you have a few minutes, I'll try to condense it, but it was sort of the thing that I thought of when I was preparing for this. We have all the research on why physical activity is good for kids. Like, there's plenty of research that mental health and physical health are connected, and none of it's earth shattering. I was making sure to do my due diligence, and I was like, this is all just sort of like, of course it is. So rather than boring you with that, but the thing that was most interesting to me was when they looked at kids who were more physically active, and they looked at the beliefs they hold about themselves. And this is now probably the second time I kind of brought up this belief thing, but it's really important. We all have these neural networks in our brain, and neural networks are connections of neurons that link together memories that we have. And you can think of it like a forest full of trees. Each tree is a belief that we hold true to be about us and the world, right? So one tree might be, I can succeed at things when I try hard. Another tree might be, the world is generally a safe place. But we also have negative trees, things like, I'm not good enough, or I always am told that I can't do it. Or, we have these things that are negative in addition to some of the positive. And beneath the tree is this whole giant root system. And that's where we link all the memories that sustain the tree. So when we're born, we don't have a forest at all. And when we're young, that's when these beliefs start to form. In fact, that's the most important time. So typically the trees in our forest are based on childhood experiences. Doesn't tend to be something that happens to us when we're 40 that creates a new belief that we then think is true about ourselves in all cases. It's the things that happen to us when we're 6 and 7 and 8, and even, up to like young adolescents. Those are the things that create these trees in our forest of our mind. With kids who are running and who are more physically active, we'll say, we know that they have more positive beliefs. Their trees are more positive, and they are linking the experiences of physical activity to those trees. So things like, when I try really hard, I can succeed. If I put my mind to it, I am good enough. I'm an important member of my team or my community. All of those type of beliefs are things that can be formed early on through physical activity. And those become really significant in our brain. We don't just prune that quickly. And so that's important in the positive and the negative. When it's a negative belief, which is where I was alluding to somebody who is perhaps being pushed too hard in running, if they have a belief that they are a failure, that belief can become so strong and stick with them throughout their life. And I see this when I work with adults, how those beliefs are impacting their life as adults. And so we don't want to build up the negative thoughts. We want to build up those positive ones. So the fact that the kids are active is, science tells us, it's building up those positive thoughts. As coaches and parents, it's how do we just enhance that even more, and calling attention to them when you see those good things they're doing. And it can be just really like blunt, you don't have to like find a cute way to couch it in this like nice metaphor and put a bow on it. You can just say to your child or the person that you're coaching, wow, when you try hard, you succeed. Or wow, you're a really valuable member of this team. Or you are a very hard worker. And just giving them those statements that help them to then make that connection that this physical activity is enforcing these good things that I feel about myself. Or maybe even creating a new tree in their brain, which is absolutely possible at their age, that they will be forming these new beliefs about themselves. So trying to make sure we're already in an environment with physical activity that it's ripe for creating these positive thoughts. Let's just make sure that we are doing a little more to make it even more salient, and that we are careful to not push so hard that the negative beliefs are getting reinforced. We can't always avoid it. Things happen that kids go through life just like we as adults do. And sometimes there's things that can't be avoided, but when we can, building up the positive as much as possible and minimizing the negative as much as possible.
Wow. Well, that was probably the perfect way to end all this, because I think that was, really the whole point of everything. And it's great that you had all, you took the science and everything, but also made it stuff that like we all can understand. Because again, right, like you're saying, everybody knows that like physical and mental health, like they all kind of go together, but painting it that way, like we really can see exactly what you're talking about. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate talking to you. And I appreciate that you took all this time and had, so much valuable stuff to share.
And just how we dove right into talking for the interview, we also kind of dove right out and cut it off before any of the goodbyes and thank yous. But again, thank you so much to Melissa for talking, because I thought it was so helpful. All the things she said and everything we talked about sounded so simple and super useful for parents and coaches alike. I loved the last thing that she talked about, and I'm so glad that she didn't let me just stop our interview with what I thought we, had to talk about. She made sure that she put her last input in about, the forest and the trees being beliefs about ourselves, and, really connecting everything that we talk about with Run Club specifically, of like physical health and mental health really are so connected, and they're both so equally important, to have great, healthy people as they're growing up. So again, that was such an awesome interview. It was super great being able to talk to her. Can't wait to hear about her running journey when she gets her double stroller, if that's what she ends up doing. And again, if you have questions, comments, interview suggestions, anything like that, make sure you email me at maracayrunclub@gmail.com.